Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sami Parvez show. Today, I'm joined by Bryan Passifiume, the Toronto Sun national politics reporter. We will be discussing about last two by-election, LaSalle Emard Wardun and Elmwood Transcona, where Liberals lost both by-elections, as Montreal's riding was the safest riding for Liberals, who held it for over 3 decades, as it was also a seat for former Prime Minister Paul Martin, who held it for 20 years. And also, we will be discussing about foreign interference, unprecedented spending of elected officials, and governor general. We will also be talking about electoral reform and did longest ballot made any impact on this by-election and the latest policies of liberal government on immigration. Thank you so much, Mr. Passifiume, to joining me on the Sami Parvez show. It's a great honor for me as you are joining me on the Sami Parvez show.
Oh, thanks for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you. As you watch, like many other journalists, the LaSalle Emard Wardun by-election and also the by-election in Winnipeg. So what do you take from the loss of Liberals, especially in Montreal's riding, which was the safe riding, like former Prime Minister Paul Martin held that seat for 20 years, and also Liberals had it for 8 years back in 2015 until 2021. So suddenly they lost it, is it time off for Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, those losses were like you mentioned it. Like that was the safest seat. I mean, if the Liberals can't win in Montreal, like where can they win? I think that that compiled with Toronto St. Paul was like two seats that even me, the cynic that I am, I was shocked when the Liberals lost St. Paul. Like I grew up in Brampton outside of Toronto. I'm worked in Toronto. I live in Ottawa now. I moved here a couple of years ago, but to see the Liberals lose that big in a downtown Toronto riding, that's huge. And that right there, I think it tells you everything you need to know about how the Liberals are doing right now. You've got Toronto, a place that the Liberals have always had and absolutely no problem winning either provincially or federally, or even municipally. If you look at the sort of the political leadings of city council, for them to lose there, I can't even imagine the alarm bells that must have set off. And then again to lose in Montreal on Monday, I'm sorry, Tuesday morning, the Liberals have their usual caucus meeting, and usually reporters like to go hang out outside the caucus room and hope to catch MPs going in and out. I was there for the outs when they left. Usually they wrap about 11 or 11:30. I was there till almost 1 o'clock before I decided to leave, and that meeting was still going on. Like those meetings are never that long, so whatever was being discussed in that room was like I'm sure every reporter every reporter in town wanted to be a fly on the wall of that meeting. Just for the meeting to last that long, I think that said a lot. Only one minister, was Champagne, came out. He's talked for a second to talk to us, and I asked him what the mood inside of the room was, but his face just kind of didn't change at all, and he just kind of said, we're doing the best we can, and walked away. So, that right there is big of an answer as you can get, because it's this is really, really bad news for the Liberals. This is polls are polls. No one, people say that the election day is the only poll that matters, and polls can be spun whatever way, but this is tangible, real proof to the Liberals, who I think are still strategically in denial about their futures, about the fact that if they can't win in Montreal, if they can't win in downtown Toronto, there's no safe seat in Canada for this party. And you've got cabinet ministers who have served with the Liberals since before Trudeau was prime minister, who are suddenly like going like, oh my God, am I going to have a job next year or whatever the next election is? Because, there's a very, very good chance that you're going to see a lot of cabinet ministers get the boot. Anita and voted out Champagne voted out. I was going to say Pablo Rodriguez, but he's, an independent now. But you know what I mean? It's an incredibly scary time for the Liberals.
Mhm. And but what are you expecting that liberals would lose in Toronto, St. Paul's, and also in Montreal ridings?
Mhm. It's it's an incalculable. They lost
Sorry,
political
couldn't hear.
capital. They lost, they lost reputation. They lost face. It was an absolutely humiliating come down, and one that I don't think I can remember in recent history.
And but what are you hearing from the insiders? Because I was reading a report which suggested that Prime Minister must decide within this week whether he would stay or he would resign. Like there are no signs he's going to resign. Do you think he's going to resign anytime soon, or what are you hearing from the insiders?
No reasonable person would think that he's going to resign. He's there to win. He believes that he's ordained. He's anointed to lead. My former colleague John Ivison at the National Post, he said that the big difference between Trudeau and a lot of other politicians is that Trudeau believes he's anointed to lead, that it's his destiny to do this, that he's fulfilling some sort of higher purpose, which it's, and anybody who's had conversations with him, like, any reporters have had off record conversations with the prime minister will say, yeah, he's got a very big entitlement over what his position holds. And he thinks that, just his reaction to everything that's going on with Jagmeet Singh pulling out of the agreement,
Mhm.
with the election losses and everything else, is that the message coming out of the Liberals is that we're just not doing a good enough job talking to Canadians. We're not, the problem, it's not our problem, it's all of yours problem, is that you guys just don't understand what's at stake here. You guys don't understand, which is a very condescending way to do politics. It's a very, it infantilizes the voting public, as reducing them to, oh, you're just children, you don't understand everything that's going on and what we're, this is all for your own good kind of thing. Which, I think that with the election loss and everything else, that message just really is not resonating among Canadians. It's insulting, and it's not helping their cause, but they still seem to be doing it.
Mhm. Yeah, and just to confirm, you said like he is not going to resign at all, like he will stay until the next election to fight it and would lose based on the current polls. So he will lose it terribly, right?
There's two absolutes that that every political insider, regardless of their party affiliation or opinions or ideologies, says is: number one, that Trudeau's not going anywhere, and two, there's not going to be another election. The confidence motion next week that the Conservatives are putting forward, it's not going to pass.
Mhm.
The NDP don't want an election. They can't afford an election. They're still paying off the last one. The Bloc certainly don't want an election. I'm not familiar with sort of how they are financially, but they're a smaller party. They don't have the same resources as the Conservatives and the Liberals. For obvious reasons, the Liberals obviously don't want an election. So yeah, you've just got, you've got Pierre Poilievre in kind of a really unique position where he's kind of like the game maker, going, come on, guys, let's, come on, Jagmeet Singh, put your money where your mouth is. The NDP specifically said they've lost confidence in Justin Trudeau and the Liberals' ability to lead. And the Conservatives are saying, well, put your money where your mouth is. Let's go. We can have an election tomorrow if you want. But, Jagmeet Singh is saying that, they may have lost confidence in the government, but when they, if they're going to topple the government, it's going to be on their terms. It's not going to
Mhm.
be so Polyev can play his games. And I
Mhm.
think that's the message that the NDP and I think the Greens and the Bloc are saying as well. So yeah, anybody expecting to go to the polls anytime between now and next fall,
Yeah.
it never happening.
Okay. So you think like we won't have any election like until next fall? I thought might be we would have any election before Christmas.
No, no, the Liberals and the NDP they're going to run the clock out. The
Mhm.
Jagmeet Singh may not have faith in the Liberals anymore, but just, he needed out from under that agreement because Singh lost all the credibility he had by criticizing the government while in a supply and confidence agreement with them. You understand what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
he can't say, Justin Trudeau can't, this government doesn't deserve to lead, but he's the one who holds the keys. When, he at any time he could have, you know, toppled this government. I'm sure the conservatives would be happy to follow along through, but he needed out from under that, and that's exactly what happened. He wasn't doing this to as some sort of like a big revolt against Trudeau with the Liberals. He needed to get out from under the yoke of that agreement because it made him look like a fool.
Mhm.
He knows it, and Trudeau knows it, and I think that's why Trudeau never made a big deal out of the when they tore up the supply and confidence agreement. I remember there was a press conference right after that video went live that the NDP produced, and he never even brought it up because it's not a big deal because they know that even though there's still not a formal agreement, the NDP aren't making anybody fall. The NDP aren't toppling anything right now. They can't afford to.
Mhm. Yeah, and do you think Jagmeet Singh is just keep supporting Liberal government for the sake of his pension? Because it is a joke, like in the social media. Where do you take this joke?
Well, I think that I don't think it's a joke. I think it's definitely on Jagmeet's mind. He's a lawyer. He's a very, very smart man. He's not an idiot. He knows that, you know, if he just hold on for another year, he'll get access to that pension. And that may, Jagmeet's already quite wealthy, but who's going to leave $200,000 on the table? No one's going to do that. I think if anybody was in this position, they do the same thing. And I almost don't fault him for it. I don't think that I think that Polyev or anybody else who was in the same position as Jagmeet, if it's within his power to run out the clock and let him get that pension, Chindan, God bless. I think that he's definitely going to think he's entitled to that. Not saying he is, I'm not saying he isn't, but he definitely thinks he's entitled to that.
Mhm. Yeah, and how do you see the longest ballot? Did it make any impact? Because Liberal lost it just by 248 votes, and this longest ballot committee is just campaigning for electoral reform, what Justin Trudeau promised back in 2015, but he broke his own promise. So do you think, did it make any impact on this by-election? And they did it in the Toronto St. Paul's, and Trudeau lost there too, and
Yeah,
they keep doing it. So what do you take from their protest?
I absolutely love that movement. I think it's one of the best movements. I write stories about them whenever I can because it's exactly why I love things like the Rhinoceros Party and
Mhm.
Sebastian Co-Rhino
Mhm.
has been deeply involved in this campaign.
Yeah.
I think it's great. I think it's great. I think it's the perfect form of protest. They're it's gumming up the works, but it's not like like these Extinction Earth idiots blocking roads and stuff. It's a fantastic, it's a perfect protest.
Mhm.
You got voters dealing with comically huge ballots that are like the size of newspaper pages. It slows down counting, and I'm sure it's a pain in the ass for the returning officers, but it gets people talking. I remember every time they make the news, people are, oh, it's election interference, it shouldn't be allowed, and I'm like, well, no,
This
it's
is how democracy works.
exactly it's a perfect protest, but did it impact the results? No, I don't think that it impacted the results at all. It's a whole separate issue. I think that the movement is definitely going in the right direction. I can't remember his name. I apologize. The Commissioner of Elections Canada was in a committee meeting last week, and he made comments that he would like to see changes to the Elections Act to make that kind of thing illegal. And it's like, so instead of you know fixing what's wrong with the system, they're trying to legislate ways to change the laws to make the protest not happen, which is, that's just beautiful. That's the Canadian way. That's the way it works, and that's great. But yeah, it did I think the longest ballot had a impact on the results? No, I don't think so at all. I think that normally people don't give a crap about by-elections to begin with, and B, by-elections are different than the general elections because they don't draw out the general public. They draw out people who want to vote for their party. So yeah, I don't think it had any any, I think it's a very, very important movement. It is one that I love and I will always write stories about. But yeah, I don't think it had any real impact on the results at all.
Mhm. Yeah, and also I have a few like I just met them, and from this Toronto St. Paul's longest ballot, like by election, there was a longest ballot
I,
down on Extreme. So
yeah, he
we
was on your
are now
show.
close friend. Like he always appears on my this podcast, Sami Parvez show. We do a weekly live show on every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Oh, it's
So
awesome.
yeah, and also there are some other friend, and I know that guy Kiran who is behind it. Like his
Mhm.
brother, like Thomas was the
And
uh
Thomas and Carey. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that
I'm
was
not gonna I'm not gonna try to pronounce their last name either. It's
yeah. No, their names are in public. If you see, and this Kiran took this election candidate to court because he was running back in 2015 and he was not allowed to run because he did not pay the deposit, like $1,000. So then court said it is unconstitutional. Like you are violating rights for not allowing someone to run for the office. So it means then these all things has changed. I believe, if I'm not wrong, back in June 2017. So and then, but now they are saying, and I wrote my story, and I had a huge conversation with him over the phone call. So he said now they are going to now target Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poulier ridings. I mean, whenever there will be next election, they may try to run as much candidate they can on their riding. Like they are the one who will make the laws, and these politicians don't want to change the laws to let someone else get in. Like don't want to make them difficult. And I was told like there was a study on the electoral reform back in 2016. Then Justin Trudeau was advised if you would make make changes on electoral reform, then you cannot make a majority government ever again. So what do you know about that one?
I really don't know too much. I apologize.
No, no, it's okay.
Is there something specific about it that you wanted to know
Yeah,
or
no, like they said, there was a study on the electoral reform back in 2016
right?
from Parliament Committee. But then Trudeau was advised that if you would pass this electoral reform, then you cannot form then you never ever can form a majority again if you make changes on the electoral reform.
Mhm. Well, see, and that's the thing with political opinion, with sorry, political promises, like during election campaigns, like you know, it's and that's kind of the unfair thing about these about political campaigns is that you can say whatever you want during the campaign. You can say things like, I'll legalize cocaine or something, or change election reform. And I think that legalizing cocaine would probably be a lot easier than election reform in Canada. But,
Mhm.
you can make these promises with any sort of expectation that they will keep them.
Mhm.
And I think that, you know, it's a good thing to say, especially when you make campaign promises that this will be the last election after first past the post, and it doesn't happen. It makes you look like an idiot. But at the same time, it's like there's so many different black eyes that this government has over the 9 years it's been in power. It's like, what's one more? What's one more broken promise? What's one more, faux pas?
Mhm. Yeah. And so let's jump to another topic. And right now, we know like foreign interference, like these commissions and committee studies keeps going on like, and there were some reports also and leaks from Insider to Global Mail and Global News. But still, it means these things keeps happening, and but liberal government is doing nothing. Like it is not taking much stricter action against these foreign interference. So I need to ask you, so do you think these things happened in the past before Trudeau's government, like Bacon Harper and Paul Martin and John Christie, did something happen like this, or this is the first time we know like there was a foreign interference in Canadian democracy?
Well, I apologize. Foreign interference is one of those things, like it's kind of a new and sexy thing right now, but it's been happening ever since there's been elections. I'm sure that even in ancient times, in ancient Rome, the world's model of democracy, in ancient Greece, there was some sort of election interference. But yeah, definitely, but the problem is now in today's society, it's so much easier to do it. Like back in the 80s, there's only so many ways you can influence somebody. Perhaps like paying newspaper columnists to slant a certain way, or buying billboards, or or influence peddling, or buying off politicians or things like that. But today, like, you don't need to do that anymore. It's all electronic. It's all, and particularly today with the days of AI and deep fakes, and where it's so simple to like take a picture of Trudeau, deep fake his voice, and have him say, I declare war on whatever, it really is, it's 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 a lot more prevalent these days because it's so much easier and it's so much more nefarious. Like foreign interference has always been an issue. It's always been, and particularly when it comes to, like non-democracies like China and the former Soviet Union. You see a lot of the same players stay the same. You see, but it's the same game, just new ways to play. So yeah, this is a problem, and particularly in Canada, is I'm sure has been as old as time. Particularly days, during World War II, there was the Cold War, particularly when it comes to, foreign interference, not only with elections, but just political. I know the CIA in the States have tried to assassinate Castro countless times. You tried the exploding cigar trick. So yeah, like other nations interfering with the affairs of other nations is nothing new. It's a tried and true practice that every nation in the world, takes part in. So, but that's the problem these days. It's so much easier, and it's so much more insidious too when it comes to when you mix the world of cybersecurity with political intrigue. There's nothing ever good comes out of that.
Okay, and there are 11 names mentioned in the NCCOP report, of like 11 MPs named, or senators names are in the NCCOP report, but we don't know them yet. Do you think we will know them in near time, anytime in future?
Yeah, I think it's the stupidest decision in the world to not release the names, because all that does is fuel speculation. It's particularly when you've got MPs like Han Dong who have already been accused of things like this. I'm not going to say whether he's guilty or innocent, but people like that are the first ones you look at when you say, oh, there's MPs who are tied up for him, but we're not going to tell you who. People are going to look at them, and people are going to toss around speculation, and then we go back where we talked about before about foreign interference and misinformation. If the Chinese wanted to meddle in the next federal election, all they got to do is pick an MP they don't like and start spreading rumors, particularly among the Chinese community, that this person MP XYZ was one of the people. And see, it's so damaging. And I think the Canadians have a right to know. These are our elected officials. I think that hiding behind issues of national security is a crock. They can take action without letting us know. Like one day we find out that 11 MPs have suddenly resigned. It'll be kind of easy to figure who they are. But yeah, I think Canadians have a right to know. This is our government. This is the basis of democracy, is electing our own representatives to act on our behalf in Parliament. And and there's a chance that 11 out of the the several hundred that we have bestowed this duty upon are not all in for Canada. That's something we deserve to know.
Yeah, And would MPs face consequences if they tell those names? You know, like in the House of Commons, they would stand up and read those names, which are mentioned in the NCCOP report.
Well, see, and that comes down to some very specific rules about parliament, which I'm not really aware of. You know, there is such a thing as parliamentary privilege, which allows parliamentarians to say things in the House and not get in trouble for them that we probably would have, issues saying outside the House. Whether that applies to violating national security rules, I don't know. I don't think anything good would come of it. The government may have its reasons for keeping them. Maybe there are reasons that we just don't know and they can't tell us that makes it a very, very good idea that if we knew, we'd say, okay, yeah, maybe that is a good idea. We'll never know that. Who knows? But yeah, I don't think it's up to any MP just to take it upon themselves as to kind of blow the whole joint and, read the names out. If someone did, I'd be very shocked, and I'm sure they'd probably become a Canadian folk hero. But I don't. I think that would be definitely a career limiting move, particularly if their current or their next job involves any sort of like a Canadian security clearance.
Mhm. And are we a lack of laws or rules of regulation? You know, like a prime minister who broke ethics law twice is still prime minister, and some MPs and ministers were also found guilty on the breaching ethics rules. But we don't see, you know, like there is a sitting MP who was charged for stealing campaign flyers, but they don't pay. It mean if a common citizen, you know, like ordinary Canadian citizen would commit such crimes, so they will face too many charges. But it seems like they are living just in a free world. So are we lack of rules and regulation with respect to elected officials?
Well, that's the beautiful double standard of politics. The same, the same people who are accused are the ones who, get to decide whether they're innocent or guilty or not. And then there's tons of questionable issues like Mary Ng, the situation with procurement with her, you know, LeBlanc's sister being named, the interim integrity,
Ethics.
uh, yeah, I apologize. I'm having a hard time talking. I apologize. Yeah, being the interim ethics czar. What you mentioned before about MP George Shahal, which was my scoop, by the way. I broke that story. Stealing flyers from somebody's front step. Like, yeah, that's kind of the age-old story in politics, and I think that just adds to kind of the stink with this current government. You've got a prime minister who has been found, you know, has been found culpable in a number of ethics issues, the whole blackface issue, surrounded by people who, who have gotten themselves into trouble, the Morneau situation, like it just kind of adds to the smell in the room when it comes to, when the election time comes and you have those, and there are a, probably the vast majority of voters out there are still undecided until election day. You've got a lot of partisan people, particularly on social media, in those echo chambers. It makes it seem like everybody's like that, but really, the average NPC Canadian, a lot of them don't decide who to vote for until they get to the voting box, and things like that. The building scandals and everything else that weighs heavily in people's mind when they say, okay, well, am I going to give this guy another chance, or should I going to try someone new? So yeah, it's, governments need to, and political parties in general need to, make sure that their members are ethically accountable for their actions, because, it just makes everybody look bad.
Mhm. Yeah, and how do you see if this thing happen in other countries, like especially in G7 nation? So would there be any consequences there, or would it be the same what's happening in Canada?
I'm sorry, your signal broke up. You locked up
Yeah,
there.
sorry.
I missed the. Can you repeat the question? It just kind of locked up.
Yeah, no worries. I said if these things happened in any other G7 nation, would they face any consequences, or it would be the same what's happening in Canada? It means no consequences for elected officials.
Well, just look at how many elections they've had in the UK. How many politicians have resigned for reasons that are pale in comparisons to the things that Canadians seem to forgive Justin Trudeau for.
Yeah.
Imagine if the blackface scandal had happened anywhere else. They wouldn't be able to work anywhere again. That certainly wouldn't be prime minister for very long. Um, you know, a lot of other countries, a lot of other democracies, you've seen politicians like world leaders step down for a lot less. And that's the weird thing about Canada. Canada and Canadians and the Canadian media particularly, and I say that as a member of the mainstream media, yeah, we're far too forgiving. And I hate bringing up this argument because it's a bit facetious, but if Pierre Poilievre had done a fraction of the things that Trudeau had done, he would have been drummed out on his ass a long time ago. Like look why they got rid of Andrew Scheer as leader. Because of the party was paying for his some of his children's education. Look at the reasons why a lot of them, like why Bill Morneau stepped down. Why it's a really weird dynamic in Canadian politics. And no, if I don't think any other world leader would have been able to get away with a tenth of what Trudeau has been able to get away with and still win elections.
Mhm. And so you brought up like you are also part of this media. So do you think media is playing a critical role for making this happen? Like they should be more more non-bipartisan, or non-partisan to when reporting such things. And there are some media also receive media subsidies from government. So do you think this thing is playing a critical role to not make government accountable?
Well, the problem is that the sort of the epidemic tribalism that's really taking over political discourse in Canada. Like nobody wants unbiased media. Nobody wants media with no bias. People want media that fits their own biases. And anything that doesn't fit that mold, a lot of people can say, "Oh, that's bias. That's because and that's kind of a sad reality today. Is that particularly in social media, that people don't want information. They don't want news. They don't want they don't want the bare line. What they want is they want news. They want news that fits their opinions already. If you know what I mean? Like they want stuff that's pre-made to fit what they already believe. Because people, far too many people these days they're not willing to have their opinions challenged. And having your opinions challenged is, sometimes it can be a very disturbing experience and a lot of times it could be a very rewarding experience, but people, see anything that challenges their preconceived opinions and they say, "Oh, that's biased. I don't want to do that. That's terrible. It's horrible." And far too many people are like that. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that there's unbiased media out there. Canadian media does have a tendency to be left leaning. I'm not saying that they're all, CTV and CBC are like, far left commie media and state run, all that nonsense. But, I think all news media have their biases. The Toronto Sun has its bias. The Star has its bias. Globe and Mail has its bias. Everybody has their bias. I don't think that people would tolerate a news service without some sort of a bias. It would be instantly regarded as boring, irrelevant, unhelpful, and be ignored and go out of business. And people will just go back to, consuming news based on whatever their opinions lead.
Okay, yeah, and I know like there are like some biasism, either biased or non-biased. It depends on the media, and you brought up like with respect to it is people mind, like they need the news what they want to hear. And okay, so let's talk about, you broke too many stories with respect to elected official spending and also governor general spending or senators, like they keep spending. It seems like there is no limit. It is just infinity. So they have, and so I'm going to again ask you, like, are we lack of laws for spending too? Like you can spend as much as you want to. Like we saw Mary Simon traveling to, I think, Dubai for spending I don't know how many thousands of dollars just for the meals and flowers
Over a
and
million.
yeah, and also laundry. I don't know what's happening there. Like at the meantime, Canadian taxpayers or Canadian citizen can't afford one-time meal.
Those stories are kind of some of my favorite to write because it's just wacky and crazy about um how some of the money gets spent. Like I found a story a few days ago on a uh, venue tickets and concert tickets, and it's spent over $700,000. In fact, I've still got the ATIP right here.
Oh,
It's all in here. It's absolutely ridiculous what some of the politicians spent their money on. Like here, I'll just flip here and, like, for example, what's the French? I'm not really gonna read French. But anyways, yeah, like money spent on like Cirque du Soleil tickets, tickets to baseball games, tickets to balls, tickets to galas and banquets and things like that. And you mentioned too about the governor general when it comes to like her travel and her spending, about her trip to to the Middle East, to Dubai, and the $1 million spent on in-flight catering,
yeah,
and the transportation and the flowers and everything else, and the prime minister's travels, things like that. About like example, the governor general, she swore in Anita Anand as the new transportation minister last week, or yeah, I guess earlier this week. I guess it's
yeah.
Sunday.
Mhm.
Whatever day people see this, to for her to attend that ceremony, she that afternoon, like an hour before the ceremony, she flew her Challenger business jet from Quebec City to Ottawa, did the ceremony, waved the sword or whatever they do, signed the book, and then like an hour later, she's back in her plane flying back to Quebec City. Like we can do citizenship ceremonies virtually.
Yeah.
Like she can't preside over this, like virtually. Like she has to fly in her jets, and like God knows how much that costs the environment in terms of carbon release and cost and everything else. And some people would argue that's the cost of doing business in a country as large as Canada. But at the same time, it's like, if the government's preaching at us to be more thoughtful about our choices, like for example, before the summer there was some concerns that road trips would cause forest fires and things like that. Like, practice what you preach. Maybe don't fly your jet from Waterloo to Toronto because you don't want to sit in the 401.
Yeah.
um like, it's probably the vast majority of Canadians will never have the privilege of being in a private jet. The smallest jet I've ever been in was a 737. So it's yeah, I think that the government, I think it's a valuable lesson that the government just won't learn. And that's not the Liberals, it's any government that, you know, we elect you to be stewards of our tax dollars. Just
Mhm.
be a bit more thoughtful when it comes to what you spend and how you spend it.
Mhm. But there is no limit, right? They can spend as much they want to.
But it really depends on what it is. Like it's impossible to say they can spend what they want to, because there are rules in place, and like the prime minister tomorrow can decide to buy a Lamborghini with tax money and things like that. But it's and it really comes down to not really like one person being nefarious and buying something with tax dollars for their own benefit. It's more of like it's an over bloated, unregulated, unsupervised bureaucracy that they come from a culture that seems really with seeing nothing wrong with spending $100,000 to spend a bunch of people to a widget convention in Asia or something, or or spending $10,000 for a brass figurine as a gift for a foreign leader, things like that. Like, it's oh, opinions are like ear holes. Everybody's got one.
Mhm. And do you think the future government under PR Puliar would be better than just current Justin Trudeau's government, or should we have the same tactics or rules? Just the players would change or the paces would change.
It's a good question because you can never judge any politician by what they say before they're elected. You learn that lesson when you look up how many promises politicians make during elections they don't keep. Like, for example, the aforementioned election reform stuff. Yeah, that's something that Polyev, and I'm going to say when he becomes prime minister, because it's definitely going to be, unless he keels over of a heart attack tomorrow, it's yeah, the Liberals don't have a chance of winning the next election. He's made a lot. He's talked the talk, and it's going to be his chance to walk the walk. Is he going to have the political courage to do half the stuff he says? Some of his more outlandish claims, like turning the CBC's headquarters into affordable housing, I don't think that, I doubt he'll be able to do that, much less really have the appetite to do that. But when it comes down to things like making life more affordable, like like getting rid of or reforming the consumer carbon tax, that would be a good thing. Taking the carbon tax off of fuel, taking the carbon tax off entirely would be a great first step. He's preached he's preached a Bible of affordability, and I think that when he becomes prime minister, he's going to have to do that. You've got, just look at Ontario, for example. Doug Ford is an incredibly contentious politician. The people left of right don't like him. The right wing don't like him. People don't consider him as a conservative premier. I'm not here to pass judgment on how, if he is or a conservative, but he's made a lot of changes that to me I have been a positive thing. Like, for example, not having to worry about license plate stickers anymore. To me, that's a great. I was just thinking about that today. Actually, I was coming up to my truck, and I noticed that my sticker had expired in May 2022, and I got kind of worried. That part of your mind for driving for 40 years clicked in my mind. Oh my God! And then I thought, oh yeah, I don't have to worry about that anymore. Things like that. Being able to buy alcohol in stores. I don't drink alcohol anymore, but I always thought it was, that compared to places like Alberta, where you can buy alcohol in privately owned stores, or you go to the United States, you can buy beer at any gas station. There's absolutely no reason why we can't do that here. This sort of the pro clutching coming from the anti-Ford people saying, oh, I saw somebody buy a bottle of beer at a gas station and then drive away. I'm like, well, they got parking lots at the beer store too. I can go to the LCBO right now, buy a handle of vodka, and drive away. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to drink it. It'd be just as easy to buy a bottle of beer at the beer store and drink it on the way home as they can by buying it at No Frills.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, and let's talk about immigration, if you don't mind. I know like this was not promised, but suddenly Liberal government changed the immigration policies and tightening internationally, capping on international students, temporary foreign workers, and also trying to uh, change the rules for asylum seekers. So are they doing it for the well-being for Canadians, or they are just Canadians sick of them? They are trailing in the polls just to show the Canadians they are doing something for them.
It was a fascinating announcement, and it's a fascinating shift for the Liberals, because the Liberals of 5 years ago, if you told them that they'd be dialing back immigration, like, people would be shocked. I've seen Liberal MPs accuse people of being racist for suggesting the things that the Liberals are doing. But yeah, I think that, when we are in an immigration crisis right now. Immigration is an incredibly important thing for any country, particularly the Canada. Like, we rely on immigration to enrich our society, but there has to be limits when you open the floodgates, and when you have, you have the people taking away jobs that Canadians
Mhm.
are entitled to. That's an issue. And all you got to do is look at how hard it is to find any place to live these days. You know, you've got everyday regular Canadian citizens and permanent residents fighting against, temporary workers for housing.
Yeah.
You've got, anybody trying to get people to, trying to get a place to live around September, like when schools are coming back. It's next to impossible because the students, like the foreign students, are trying to find places to live, and they're
Yeah.
competing with, with Canadian permanent resident students as well. So, yeah, it's an untenable situation, and it just by the Liberals doing a 180 on their immigration policy, both policy and their sentiments, that says a lot right there how bad the situation is. Like it's unfair for anybody who's coming here expecting to work and send home money. Like
Mhm.
temporary workers, suddenly they come here, expecting to send, hundreds of dollars home to their family, but everything that they're earning goes straight into just being able to survive here. And
Yeah.
it's unfair. And you have a whole cadre of foreign workers coming here who were sold a bill of goods by whoever recruited them, that Canada is the land of opportunity, Canada is the land of money. My wife was born in the Philippines. She came here as a temporary worker, and now she's a permanent resident, and also the mother of my daughter.
Mhm.
Um, you know, you know, it's so funny is sort of seeing Canada through her eyes, because she came to Canada like over 10 years ago, so she's been here a while. But like to her, it's still it almost breaks my heart to see how disappointed she is when it comes to, she's like, oh, they do that here too. Like they used to do that back in the Philippines. I thought Canada was better than that. Like such things like corruption or political scandals, where corruption and bribery is just common over there. If
Mhm.
you're a Filipino and you want a Canadian visa, you can either pay the bribe and get it done sooner, or stand in line with everybody else and have it wait a year. That's just the way things are over there. That's the way things
Yes.
are in a lot of countries. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm sure a lot of immigrants feel the same way. They're really disappointed to see that Canada is really no different. Canada isn't the land of milk and honey that a lot of immigrants are sold on.
Mhm.
That they're told, oh, come here, you can live here, you can send home a few $100 every paycheck, and like I know, a few $100 goes a lot further back in the Philippines than it does here, and it does in a lot of countries. But yeah, they're coming here to be used as manual labor, and they're getting nothing out of it. They're just making just enough money to survive, if that. A lot of them aren't. Go walk into any homeless shelter here, and you see a lot of people who came to this country hoping for a life, for a better life, and instead they're you know sleeping next to somebody overdosing in a shelter. It's heartbreaking, and it's terrible, and it shouldn't happen. People should come to Canada to take advantage of the opportunities that we have, not to be used by our society, be used by the Canadian citizens and permanent residents and people who are already here as a means to an end. And then as soon as their term is done, you kick them out and they got nothing to show for it, because it's a waste of time for them, and it's I can't imagine what it must be like for them.
Yep. And I myself has been employed since January. Like it is hard to get a job. And according to Statistics Canada, which was released in August, it says like the unemployment at like 6.7%. So do you think these caps on immigration or international students, would it be like implemented for a longer period, and would they make any impact to change the unemployment situation in Canada? And
You know,
when should we expect any changes?
unemployment in this country is it's such a multifaceted issue. Like it's impossible, disingenuous to say it's, oh, just immigrants are coming to take our jobs. That's not really the case. You've got a situation where businesses just can't afford to hire people.
Yeah.
Then you have situations where businesses put up job postings
Mhm.
and, they're not really intent to hire, just to, screw with metrics and things like that. So it's, you know, you know, it's it's multifaceted. You've got sure you've got a workforce oversaturated with people. It's a lot easier for companies to hire foreign workers and pay them less than to hire Canadians who, may demand a little bit more respect and integrity from their employers. You've got businesses that are facing insurmountable, in a lot of cases, affordability challenges when it comes to even sourcing product. It made a lot of headlines, in the latter stages of the pandemic, but there still is supply chain, I'm not going to call it a crisis, but there are still supply chain crunches out there. It's still hard to get things. Anybody who's ever tried to buy a car recently knows that there's still chip shortages, there's still parts shortages, there's still, the supply chain is still clogged. So I think that it's one of those things that can only be approved by sort of a holistic improvement of the Canadian economy. And that's something else that really drives me crazy. But the Liberals is that they take credit for, like, for example, the central bank released a statement last week that inflation was holding at 2%. And that day of question period, Christopher Freeland was taking credit for it. Like it was sort of like a feather in their hat. Well, I'm sure the guy, living with his family in a tent because they lost their job and their home is crying for joy because interest rates, I mean, the inflation rate has stabilized. That doesn't really help anybody, and that doesn't really help anything, and it doesn't really help the situation. Like it's never gonna, help a lot of people afford a home,
Mhm.
um, you know, unless you come here with, the privilege of wealth. Like no immigrant's going to be able to buy a home here.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I make good money and, I rent. I don't own the home I'm sitting in here. I can't afford a 40, 50,000, $1,000 down payment when, you know,
Mhm.
rent is, I'm paying almost $3,000 a month in rent. So
Yeah.
it's when it's sort of one thing affects another, affects another, affects another. It's like a snake eating its own tail. There's no beginning and no end, and all you can pretty much wait for is for sort of the whole situation to get better.
Mhm. And are we going to back to normal pre-COVID era anytime soon? What do you predict?
I'm sorry, can you ask me that again? I apologize.
Yeah, sorry. I said, are we going to back to normal pre-COVID era anytime soon? Or do you think everything will be normal, like the prices, the inflation, the housing crisis, the unemployment?
Well, the pandemic is one of those situations that changed everything. Like I'm old enough like I remember September 11th. That changed the world in a lot of ways, in a lot of ways. The 2007 financial crisis changed the world in a lot of ways, and COVID changed the world in a lot of ways. I think that a lot of politicians, and like I mentioned before, when Freeland was gloating about the 2% inflation rate, she was talking about how it's pre-COVID levels. And I think that politicians need to get past the comparing how things are today with how things were before COVID, because it's like today is a completely different world than it was back then
Yeah.
in so many different ways. I think that, you know, we're sitting in a new normal right now. Things aren't going to get how they were like back in the 90s, for example, when you could buy a home for just a few $100,000, when, you know, it was people had a chance to live a good life without making six-figure salaries. That's those days are gone. The days before the pandemic are gone. This is the new normal. And I think that, the world needs to adjust to that new normal. So I don't know if prices are going to go the way that were before COVID. I don't think that's a fair measure. I think that if things do go back the way they are, I think that's great. But I don't think that pre-COVID is a good benchmark for any politician to use.
Okay, thank you so much. And you already mentioned with respect to we won't see any an election anytime soon. If we would have any election, when do you predict it would happen?
I think if there's ever going to be an election, I think it's probably going to be early next year. I don't think there's going to be anything for the rest of this year. You've got Parliament's only going to be sitting they've got a few weeks off here and there, but they're going to be rising in December. They won't sitting in. I don't have a calendar in front of me. I think it's like January, sometime in January, I'm sure. But yeah, there's just not a whole lot of sitting days. Parliament's just sort of getting going right now. The Conservatives have no choice but to attempt a confidence motion. They're going to have a lot of chances to. There's a lot of opposition days coming up where they can present confidence motions. There's a lot of natural money bills, like the fall economic statements coming up. That's another opportunity for a confidence vote. You got the budget coming up early next year. So I don't think that there's going to be any realistic chance of an election before the next budget. I think you can put me down for that. If we're going to do a pool on it, you can put me down for whenever the next budget is. There's not going to be anything before that.
Okay, thank you. If there would be any election in the next year, so it would be under Justin Trudeau leadership, like Trudeau would lead a Liberal in the next election, right?
No, unless the caucus has a sort of a meeting in some smoky back room and decide to mutiny against Trudeau, and which I don't think would ever happen. No, you'd never see that. There's too many true believers in that inner circle to give him the boot. I'm sure every backbencher and I know there are some cabinet ministers who are fed up with Trudeau. I know probably every backbencher in the Liberal caucus would like to see him go, because the poor guy who, won his first seat in the last election is looking at this is probably going to be it for him. I don't, Trudeau's never gonna, unless there's an act of God or mutiny, I don't think Trudeau's going nowhere.
Okay, so I will just leave it here, and just to recall, Trudeau would stay until next year to lead Liberals, and would lose poorly based on current polls.
Yeah, you can take that to the bank. But if there's an election next week, I hold no responsibility.
Okay, thank you so much, Bryan, for joining me. There were lots of discussion you shared, and thank you so much for your time. I know you are a busy man, but on your weekends, pardon me to bothering you, to bringing you here.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honored to take part.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's my honor. Thank you so much.